Trade between China and Latin America has grown 22 times since 2000. The two sides are embracing an upgrade in their cooperation. How will the Belt and Road Initiative promote China-Latin America relations? U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is pioneering his first trip to Latin American countries, just as the continent views the Trump administration with increasing doubts. How will the U.S. view China's growing presence in the region? And as Latin America is reaching out for more economic participation with Asian countries, how will it change the economic and political dynamics across the Pacific Ocean?
Latin American countries recently discussed their incorporation into the Belt and Road Initiative with China through a formal meeting held in late January. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is courting Latin American representatives in the face of stiff competition from Chinese trade and growing investment. While the trade links between China and Latin America continue to be a defining feature of their relationship, Chinese banks have sharply increased their investments in Latin America. Will China's increasing presence in the region make the U.S. feel uneasy? Is it time for a new China-Latin America relationship? To discuss these issues and more, today I'm joined in the studio by Charles Tang, who is the chairman of the Brazil-China Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Yang Zhimian, a professor with the Institute of Latin American Studies from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to the discussion here, gentlemen. Are you satisfied with the current relationship between China and Latin America, given the uncertainty and unpredictability about the debt crisis or even political situations in countries like Venezuela? Charles?
Well, Venezuela, of course, is a unique situation where the populist government is really trying to recover from, and you know, Venezuela is such a wealthy country, and because of some of these policies and the division within the country, the economy is doing very, very poorly. Now, it's a unique situation. However, it's still a very rich country, and I believe that and with China now helping the oil production in Venezuela, because PDVSA does not have the most modern techniques and equipment, I think that they will recover a lot. However, you know, China has always been engaging very strongly with all of Latin America and Caribbean. In fact, we were just joking that our good friend Lei Hong from the CCPIT is usually called the ambassador of China to all the Latin America. I just came back from a conference last month, 2 weeks ago in Chile, in Santiago, Chile, where Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Wang Yi, was there. And it was the China-Latin America conference. And just 1 month ago, or a month and a half ago, in Punta del Este in Uruguay, there was a huge, you know, the annual China-Latin America conference, Latin America Caribbean conference, where thousands of people attended, like more than 700 Chinese people attended, and thousands of you know, Latin America business people attended from all over Latin America. So for many years, the CCPIT has been doing a very good job in creating this China-Latin America Caribbean meeting conference. 1 year it's in one of the countries of Latin America, and the other year it alternates between Latin America and China. So one of the cities in China will host it this year. Last year it was in Punta del Este in Uruguay. You know, and also many of the countries that don't recognize China today are in Central America and the Caribbean. But I think that, you know, with the advent of Panama and the benefits that you know, Panama is enjoying for their development, many of the leaders of the countries in Central America and the Caribbean and even in South America are saying that they must worry about their country's development. the national interests of their country.
Because of Taiwan.
Yeah, because the countries that do not recognize China today, they understand the limitations that Taiwan has to foster their development. And nations don't have friends. Nations have interests. And these interests guides their friendships.
We'll come back to examining issues like interest of friendship. But Mr. Yang, does China make investment in soft power, infrastructure, trade, resources? What do we do there?
I think the bilateral relationship, we have upgraded from the bilateral ties to the oral cooperation. So in a couple of years ago, I think 3 years ago, in 2015, we set up the framework 1+3+6. That means we not only concentrate on the trade, investment, and financial cooperation, but also we want to expand more areas, fields in the countries in the region, including soft power, or the culture exchanges, also people-to-people exchanges. So I think it's true that we focus on the economic cooperation, but we will expand the areas. Mainly, I think we focus on the economic relationship.
But Latin America has always been regarded as the backyard of the United States. On the other hand, more and more media reports from the West say China's presence in Latin America is more practical, economic than ideologically motivated. Do you agree?
Yes, I don't think the Latin American countries consider as it themselves are the backyard of the United States. The backyard, I think it came from the mineral doctrine in the 18th century, in the early of the 18th century. But in 2013, the former State Secretary of the United States, John Kerry, announced mineral doctrine of the world. So I think today we cannot use the backyard to describe the relationship between the Latin American and the United States. Today, I think we have China, both China and Latin American and other regions have so many common interests and some ideas of the development, such as the multilateralism and free trade support, the free trade system, and need the open economy. So there are so many similarities between the different regions. So I think it's not the backyard.
In what areas do you think areas such as Caribbean countries and South American countries would appeal to the Chinese mind and heart?
Well, the same problems afflict most of the developing nations. Most of the developing nations in Latin America, Caribbean don't have the infrastructure they need to, be a basis for their rapid growth. And China, of course, is the world champion of developing infrastructure in developing countries. China changed Africa from a lost continent, stripped of its wealth by its former colonial masters, into a continent of hope. In the countries where China invested, the fastest growing nations in the world are the African countries where China has built its infrastructure as a basis for its growth. Well, when I talk to many of the leaders of Latin American countries, South American countries, I'm also the chairman of the Paraguay-China Chamber of Commerce, and we're setting up the Dominican Republic-China Chamber of Commerce. And I think that you will find in most of these leaders a desire to interact with China. In fact, one of them said, why, Taiwan has such a huge economic relationship with China. Why can't we even export 1 kilo of our beef to China? So I think that you will see in this year, I believe, that several countries will probably follow the lead of Panama, okay? And it's basically because they really want to interact with China, because China is the driving force for the world development.
Do you think our establishing the official ties with Panama has helped open the door for neighboring countries in the same region to normalize their relationship with the Chinese mainland, and that will cause domino reactions? What are your thoughts?
I think at least it set example for other countries that at the moment doesn't have the diplomatic ties with China mainland. And I think with the tight cooperation between the two countries, Panama and China, I think other countries will maybe follow the steps of Panama. And you know,
it largely depends on whether DPP, the opposition party in Taiwan, would quickly adjust its cross-strait policies. If Taiwan refuses to accept the 1992 consensus, meaning one China principle, then the mainland would make a stronger response to the pro-secession movement in the island of Taiwan, and therefore perhaps other neighboring countries of Panama would follow suit in normalizing their relations. Because previously the two sides of the Taiwan Strait agreed to freeze their diplomatic battles, vying for influence in those countries Taiwan had the so-called official ties with. Panama may have set a very good example. Did you follow this process very carefully, Charles?
Yeah, I'm following. You know, we're of course we in our Paraguayan Chamber of Commerce. You know, I made a speech in the Paraguayan Industrial Association to increase the commercial and the relationship with China. And I also mentioned that our chamber will help all the Chinese companies, whether from the mainland or from Taiwan. But you know, we can see the example of Brazil. When the government, Temer government took over, you know, and the Workers' Party left China, left power. As you know, Lula was the one who took Brazil away from the U.S. axis and started developing a close tie and partnership with China. When the Temer government took over, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. José Serra, stated very clearly that he wanted to realign Brazil with the United States. However, after Brazilian government saw the United States was not really going to do much for Brazil, and China was investing massively into Brazil. In fact, Chinese investment in Brazil is surpassing $100 billion. Then, of course, the Temer government started to align itself very closely and have a strong economic partnership with China.
Thank you so much. You are watching Dialogue with Charles Tang, who is the chairman of the Brazil-China Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Yang Zhimin, a professor with the Institute of Latin American Studies from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. We're discussing ties between China and Latin America, particularly our investment in infrastructure, trade, and financial services. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Well, there's of course the issue of a boom and bust in our presence, or concerning our presence in Latin America. If you invest heavily in the infrastructure, trade, I mean, it's fine. China is a hot ticket. Everybody's talking about China and business opportunities. But what if the economy declines in general? Will there be a major bust and debt crisis, like many times in Latin America, because of your pegging with the US dollar? Charles?
Yeah, I think that you know, what China should also do is increase its swap agreement with the Latin and Caribbean governments. And you know, China is already being very, very aggressive in the sense of setting up bilateral investment funds for infrastructure, regional and by country. For example, the $20 billion infrastructure investment fund in Brazil, the China-Brazilian fund, is very, very important instrument to help pull up the economy of the country. And 2/3 of the capital was invested by China, 1/3 by the Brazilian government, but the governance is equal. It's 50-50. So this is the type of activities that China is taking initiative that really attracts the people from all over the world. Last December, I was participating in the high-level dialogue organized by the International Department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, where almost 800 people from more than 120 countries, political leaders, were invited. All the leadership, top political leadership of Brazil were there, for example, and from all the countries in the world. It was the first initiative of this nature. But this is, combined with the CCPIT, the Latin America, Caribbean, China conferences every year. Now with the Central Committee organizing these high-level dialogues with the whole world, it really shows how China is expanding its means of gaining friends and discussing the mutual problems of the world together. This conference held by the organized by the China Economic Cooperation Center of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, was very, very highly praised. I was participating in it for the 3 days, and this is the type of initiatives, such as the ones done by CCPIT, the CECC, that will gain friends around the world. And China, like I always say, Chairman Xi Jinping will be remembered by history for being the Chinese leader who is consolidating very rapidly the leadership, global leadership role of China. Not only because Trump is retreating from the world and the world is looking towards China, but also because of the bold and visionary and very intelligent initiatives that China took, such as setting up the BRICS new investment bank, the AIB, the regional and bilateral funds for development infrastructure. Of course, the road and bridge will bring 65 countries that will benefit and develop, and many of these countries will leave their geographical isolation to become much, much closer to China. So these measures that have been taken for the last 5 years, okay, are very, very important as the groundwork for China's friendship with the whole world. And of course, the whole world, because of this, is looking towards the government of Chairman Xi Jinping to become a global leader of the world.
The issue is whether China stands ready to assume more of the world leadership and responsibility. Leadership means responsibilities. It's also part of China's domestic politics. The general public may give a second thought as to whether China should be reaching out. Now, trade between China and Latin America has multiplied 22 times since the year 2000. But China's structural transformation means traditional commodity exports will decline significantly, as shown in the Latin American Economic Outlook 2016. Do you think the issues such as resource curse should also be prioritized, should also be taken very seriously in our business relationship with this promising continent?
Yes, of course. If we're judging the development of the bilateral economic cooperation, that will begin with trade, because trade based on the complementarity in terms of each other's economic structure, resources. So I think we should continue develop the bilateral trade. Well, just now I mentioned 1+3+6, the cooperative framework between China and CELAC. That means we not only concentrate on trade, but also we should develop financial cooperation and investment. So that means it gives us broader fields to cooperate. One hand, we should insist on develop the trade, On the other hand, we should develop investment. That's because of the level of the development of China. We accumulate lots of the foreign reserve.
The point of my question, Mr. Yang, is we have accumulated a lot of overcapacity due to the boom of infrastructure building inside China. And also, this is the first question. Second question, when it comes to our steady business presence in Latin America, is the so-called patient capital. Of course, we eye the opportunities from a long-term perspective. However, don't forget, most of the Latin American countries are democracies. They have bipartisan politics. Anything but the previous administration would be a curse for the stability of China's business stakes there. Now, with this in mind, what do you think of the risks? We got to assess the risks. And Belt and Road Initiative promises to include Latin America. But increasingly, I believe, policymakers, scholars in particular, start to reassess the risks that may come along with opportunities. Do you think Latin America is also a land of uncertainty despite the promises?
Generally speaking, in terms of some assessment made by some, like the rating firms, like the EIU, like the World Economic Forum, and other institutes, that Latin American, generally speaking, politically, economically, is a stable destination, not only for the investment, but for the economic cooperation or financial services. But maybe some countries, like just now Charles mentioned, some countries in South America, is uncertainty because of the political situation. But it doesn't mean the whole South American or even the whole Latin American is not stable.
But I'm afraid your analysis might be questionable with particular regard to politics in Brazil. For example, at the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, your elected president failed to show up at the podium. Someone else replaced her. Do you think the anti-graft campaign in Brazil, which is a good thing, of course, to fight corruption and to have a clean government, that may provoke people like the media to think twice about the risks there?
I think that when you talk about risks of Latin America, you have to analyze each country. I mean, different countries, you know, some countries are very, very stable. Some countries are going through some momentary turbulence, and other countries have deep-rooted, you know, imbalances that take longer to correct. In the case of Brazil, you know, the Temer government, despite its low popularity, is doing some, you know, reforms that Brazil really, really needs, like the labor reforms. You know,
right.
Now he's tackling the Social Security reforms, and he also plans to tackle the fiscal restructuring to make it less, you know, onerous in both the labor laws and the tax laws, and more simplify it. So I think that if he's able to accomplish all this, he's already done the labor reform, Brazil will become a much more business-friendly country. And the Brazilian economy is rising. Okay, my former colleague at the Bank of Boston is the Minister of Finance of Brazil, and he's doing a very, very good job. Despite all the turbulence and all the political problems, he is, you know, increasing the economic growth of Brazil. And we have to understand, just like in China, the fight against graft and corruption is very, very important.
The last question is very much about how Latin American countries and partners may help improve the world order, because the world order at this moment is based on Bretton Woods Yalta framework in the wake of the Second World War. Both China and Latin America stand for multilateralism, and as you said wisely a few minutes earlier, even John Kerry refused to take Latin America as the backyard of the United States. So, Charles, you are a businessman, but business has a lot to do with politics, and you have to take into consideration the comprehensive geopolitical situation in the 21st century, when China is expected, you like it or not, is expected to assume the leadership that the United States wants to pull out of. So what do you think of the role that Latin America countries could play?
I think that Latin American countries, a few years ago I wrote an article for the World Policy Institute of New York, where I alluded to the fact that the backyard of the United States is growing a Chinese garden. And it's growing a Chinese garden only because that most of the countries see how important it is to have a very close relationship with China for their own development. So you take, more than $100 billion invested into Brazil, certainly help Brazil, especially within the crisis that it's going through. And it's leaving the crisis now. So I think that China's vision for the world is basically one of win-win. We want to make money, but we'll help you develop. Okay, we will help develop all the countries in the world that interact with us, because China needs to export its excess capacity. China's business is business. Some other countries' business is war. Okay, and China's vision, it really is a new experience for the world. Throughout history, the stronger nations always dominated the weaker nations. In China's point of view, it's win-win. We don't interfere with the other countries' internal problems, and we would like to have business relationship, trade and investment, which will help both parties. It's a win-win situation. And I think that is very, very important, and that is the New World Order, Chinese style.
The Belt and Road style, which aims to be inclusive and to pursue co-prosperity without attaching any strings regarding the internal affairs of the host country. Well, with that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue with Charles Tang and Mr. Yang Yinlin from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.